Hey, Skoppy. It's my boy Skoppy. He's 11.
So if I can say a couple words here before we get into the weeds here. The first thing I'd like to say is that I put a Monty Roberts halter on this horse. I'm a huge, huge fan of this halter. I think it's a brilliant piece of equipment, and I would suggest that anybody who wants to make a meaningful donation to this organization, get a Monty Roberts halter and donate it to the farm, because I think it's if I were on an island with nothing but a group of horses, I'd want two pieces of equipment, my saddle and a Monty Roberts halter, and I could go a long way with that. So I don't know much about this horse, but what I'm going to do is first sort of observe his demeanor, and then I'm going to check his back and see if he has any reaction to me running my hands down his back, so I have a little sense of him to start with. And I'm also going to check to see if I think he's grounded, and I'll show you how I'm going to check for that. I'm going to first just see if he's got much in the way of back pain, and I just do that with my fingers. I would say he really has none, which is very good. Is he in regular work, Colin? No. It doesn't. There are plenty of horses that are not in regular work that have back pain, and then I'm gonna do a quick test to see if he's grounded, and I will show you how I'm going to do this in a different way. But there are many ways to see if a horse is grounded or not. And Holly, if I could have a towel, that would be, if you have one.
Hand towel will work.
A small.
Right here, like right here.
That'll work. So there's a lot of information on grounding, but and I won't get into it. I'm just going to avoid it for a moment, but maybe I'll talk about it a little later. So I can test for grounding in a couple of ways. I do one test with a pendulum, and it shows me, because it's going back and forth, I don't know if you can see that, but that it's, I'll do it here, and because it goes back and forth, it tells me that he's not grounded. But I'll show you another way that I can discern this. So we have a grounding table over here, and I'm going to put this towel on this grounding table to make sure that it's grounded, and then I'm going to need a volunteer to do another kinesthetic muscle test if anybody wants to volunteer for that.
I just drink my super water so I can.
We can't have
We're going to put you outside.
our young man do that again. Who would like to volunteer for a kinesthetic muscle test?
Megan.
I can do it.
Megan? Can you have your cell phone?
Yes. Oh.
Good. I'm going to do this once, and then I'm just going to go on with it. If you can do the same test, stand on one foot, put the other one behind. There you go, perfect. I love it. Right? So I'm going to push down here, and we're going to see what your baseline is. That's the best you can do?
No, that's fine.
No.
Bring Tyler back.
A lot of pressure. The kids set a high standard.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm going to start push, and that's pretty good. So, excuse me. just a minute.
Sorry about that.
She did have some of the super water.
She did have super water.
The hold, there you go. So all of this is to show you how you can assess whether this is grounded or not. Okay, so I'm gonna push here. And you're stronger with that towel. Right? So I'm gonna hold this towel up against Skoppy. Don't go away. Okay? I'm gonna hold this towel up against Skoppy. And the idea is that if he has an accumulation of charge that he wants or needs to offload, right? He's gonna offload it onto an empty vessel, which is the towel, right? So that's why I'm holding it here. And now you're gonna come and do the same thing again, and hold the towel, right? Exactly the same way, right? And you're weaker, right? Would you agree that you're weaker?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. So what does that mean?
Yes.
It means that charge, if you think about this in this way, our bodies and the horse's bodies are solar panels. We absorb all kinds of energy. And if you think about it in this way, the earth has a slight negative charge, the atmosphere has a slight positive charge, and as upright beings in the world, we used to absorb all kinds of energy, and because we were mostly either barefoot or wearing leather-soled shoes, which allow for certain amount of I would say discharge, we would be in a state of energy equilibrium, right? But in our current lives, we wear mostly rubber-soled shoes. So we are insulated from the ground, we're absorbing all of this stuff, and we're not able to get rid of it, which is why when you walk along the beach in barefoot in the surf, you feel better because you're in a state of energy equilibrium. Horses are primarily designed to be in energy equilibrium, and the environment that we're keeping them in is increasingly disallowing for energy equilibrium, right? So they end up with a lot of charge, which we don't know how they interpret that. We don't know what that feels like to them. And it's wrong for us to think that because it doesn't really bother us very much that it doesn't bother them. Well, we know that, and I'll show you this one time, that water is affected, and the state of water is affected by this accumulation of charge. So you can see that he's a little bit busy. He's very engaged, and I'm going to put the Theratree on, which has all of the same, has many of the same characteristics as the saddle has. It's specifically designed from the standpoint of the energy component. It doesn't have to be on their backs, but it's a very useful place to put it because it came from the saddle, so it's a logical thing to put it on their back. And I'm going to use this girth. I'm going to use this girth. I'm going to use another girth. But you notice already that he starts licking and trying to put it down there. You'd like a girth that has the webbing. Oh,
Yeah, the gray one. Buggy ball for tread. So they've got a little, like right under the.
So I'm putting a girth on him that's copper lined, which means it's conductive. And what I'm trying to create for him right here at the moment is a scenario where we would say he's walking on the beach in the late afternoon or early morning sunshine, and he's barefoot in the sand. And so how are we creating that? We're creating that two ways. One, the TheraTree is inputting red light. That's what it does. It inputs red light in the far infrared spectrum. For those of you who are interested in specifics, it's somewhere in the, we believe, in the 3,000 nanometer spectrum. So the TheraTree is inputting red light in that spectrum, and the copper girth hooked to the ground wire here is, it's not exactly like this, but it's a good way of thinking about it. It's draining energy that he wants to offload. It's not exactly that way, but it's a good way to think about it. So we're creating, hopefully by inputting good energy and creating an outflow of bad energy that will create a state of equilibrium. If I can get someone just to stand with him for just a moment, I'm going to show you one other thing that I'm going to do.
And just to fill in.
Don't get in, just be with him, but not, I'm just gonna give him this guy here.
Ted, will you speak to the, so a lot of times we'll ground the horses once a day or something like that, but they can be wearing the TheraTree for hours. So they don't always have to have a wire hooked up to them. I mean, 9 times out of 10, it's just a TheraTree and they're in their stall, and you can't overdose them. And it seems to have a really cumulative effect the more you use it. The more.
Your ships on in one.
Yeah,
Try
and
it
shipping
all
is
the
great
way
for
up to the
shipping.
winter.
Yeah,
And then when you
Dennis-
have a TheraTree, you just stood in the road, you can
Yes, and, you know, that water component that Ted's not really talking about as much there, it's allowing them to make use of water on a cellular level, so they're hydrated on a cellular level. So for trailering, it's great because they arrive not dehydrated. Another great time to use it is with the barrier, which is really calm them down, the ones that are tricky to handle. So they do this a lot, where they'll kind of look at it, and then working through their flies.
So I've just got another wire on him here, and that wire, there are two ways of doing this. One is with a wire going to the ground portion of an electrical outlet. This wire is actually going to a piece of copper that's stuck in the ground outside. So I've got two drains working on him instead of one. And we're going to test him as we go along, and but the first thing that we're going to try to do is just observe and see if the TheraTree and any of this grounding doesn't have a positive influence on him, which it doesn't seem to be doing right at the moment. But there's a lot of curiosity to all of this. What we want to observe is that he's licking and chewing and sometimes the just plug this for a moment. Just go off the other one. Sometimes there we found and this is something that you all should be aware of, that we were not aware of, that there can be, there's a phenomena called dirty electricity. where in particular barns, there might be wiring that was put in such a way that creates a lot of, I would say, stray voltage. And sometimes that stray voltage can backfeed through an electrical outlet in a way that's, I would say, not grounding the horse the way we would hope it does. So,
Do you have any written material on that? I tried to get my electrician to understand what you explained to me, and I'm not sure if I could.
well, I would say, and again, I don't want to get too much in the weeds about it, but there's a lot of material written about grounding. That's the first thing. And there's also a lot of there is information that is not horse related, but related to particularly the dairy industry, where it's been shown that cows that live underneath power lines produce less milk because of the high voltage as a result of that. So,
There's been a bunch of studies because they were using
Right.
milk production.
Financial.
Yeah,
So maybe he seemed happy when it was hooked on this side, but as soon as you hooked it to that side, he seems like he's a lot more.
well, there might be stray voltage or dirty voltage or something backfeeding through here, which is why I went with the one outside. I would say that, you know, he's a busy fellow, and one of the things we wanna do is to so one of the things that we don't, one of the starting points, I think, for thoroughbreds has to be a recognition that they are coming to this particular environment here with a lot of deficits. And one of the deficits is biomechanical, because if anybody's seen what's inside an exercise saddle, it's really not a very big stretch to say it's an instrument of torture, right? And so we take these beautiful young horses that have a lot of sensitivity, and we strap this instrument of torture on them and we make them go fast. So that's problematic. So when they come to us, they have a biomechanical deficit. They've also been in an environment which has, I would say, very non-natural. You know, they're not turned out. They have no connection with the ground. They're raised now on artificial surfaces. You know, they have a nature deficit disorder, you could say, and that the result of that comes in with grounding.
But
So
all this, the blinking and licking and chewing and sneezing are all signs of release. I mean, you can see that in acupuncture.
So you can see it's starting to have some effect on them. He's starting to blink more. That's one thing to notice. The licking and the chewing is another. The head height is another. How much he's moving is another. So the idea is to take a horse that has, I would say, an energy imbalance, if you want to call it that, and to create this energy balance. And old time horsemen used to do this by getting horses off the track and taking them and turning them out for a year. That's what that did, along with other things. But that's what that did. It didn't necessarily solve the problem when they came back in, but that's typically what we think has to happen with thoroughbreds that we get off the track. They need time to get sort of rebalanced. My point, if there is one, is that I think we can have that happen quicker, right? So in other words, I'm without turning this horse out for a year, I think I can create this same kind of energy homeostasis within a very short period of time. It takes about, for horses that are, so let me back up and say, what are the signs of lack of energy homeostasis? I would say, an overall tension, an overall anxiety, an overall lack of quietude. That would be one. And the second would be skin sensitivity. You gotta think about the energy absorption being primarily through skin. So if skin is the absorber, skin is also where this shows up the most, and a lot of it shows up through hypersensitivity, which is expressed by getting on horses that, and then feeling like you can't touch them, you can't touch their mouths, you can't touch their sides, you can't really sit on their back, they're just too reactive. And I believe those are principal signs of horses not being grounded, okay? And that's a lot of horses. There's another phenomena which Lucy can speak to, which is sort of the opposite end of the spectrum, which is horses that are extraordinarily dull. Their skin either horses have two responses. One is to be hypersensitive, and the other is to be sort of shut down and to have almost no response. So that's the second response. And I would say with this horse, we might just shut the fluorescent lights off just quickly. We'll just see if that has any effect. Yeah, that's fine. That's good. There's a lot of blue light that comes from fluorescence.
Do LEDs have the same blue light?
Damn.
Many of them do.
Like all the new ones on the
That's all
cars.
right. You can leave that one on. That's
I'm thinking it, like I switched all my wiring in the barn from fluorescent to LEDs. Are they still a problem?
they certainly
The
can
thing about
be.
the fluorescence is you can actually buy these little sleeves you can put on the bulbs themselves
Okay.
that warm them up. So
Okay,
you can just, yeah.
where do you go?
We got them online. Ted, did Jeff get those online?
Yeah.
So we have them online.
Yeah,
We solved it.
okay,
So
I'll get that in color.
what's interesting about it now, and we'll do this test pretty soon, but if I hold this pendulum and I hold my hand, you can see it's not tick-tocking anymore. It's actually starting to spin. It's not a lot. It's spinning just a little bit. What I would hope that to do when we're grounding, when we grounded him, is for it to spin more than that. I'm gonna do one other thing, which I'd like to see if it doesn't have more of a impact on
Oh, poor baby boy. His scars. His scars.
So this is a tool that has no normal application for horses, but it's what's called a degausser or a demagnetizer. And one of the things that we have, one portion of this energy phenomenon that is not particularly well understood, but I think many of you might have had an experience with it, is, and particularly this time of year, is the effect of static electricity. You know, have you ever pulled a horse's blanket off and it's just full of static, right? And, you know, you see their tail
Yeah.
go up straight. Static electricity is, you know, we get, I wouldn't say we get used to it, but I would say it's certainly, it can't be construed as a pleasant sensation. You know, I don't think anybody enjoys walking around with their dress or their pants sticking to them. Static electricity is something that many horses don't like. So I'm just going, what we've learned is that this, thank you, Mike, is that demagnetizing gets rid of static electricity. And so what I'd like to see is if we de-static him, whether that isn't another portion. So if you think about electromagnetic fields, they're called electromagnetic, not electric only and not magnetic only. They're electromagnetic. Electric fields and magnetic fields have very similar properties. They're not the same. And what we've learned is that grounding takes care of the electric part of the electromagnetic field. And this little device that I have here, which demagnetizes, takes care of the other part of that field. And I'd just like to see if that doesn't help him a little bit more. And I know this looks like a lot of wires and cords and everything else because we're not, this is, this is not an environment that's necessarily set up to do this particularly easily. But we'll see if that doesn't move the needle a little bit. And then I'm getting ready to check him again. And we'll do the cloth test now. So you can see, having demagnetized him, that pendulum is moving differently than it was before. So obviously, I would say there was a corollary between having done the demagnetizing. And what we'll do now is we'll take this cloth and I'll ground it over here like I did before. And then I'll need the same volunteer. Where's my volunteer? Okay, so can I borrow you again? So we're just gonna check this to see if it's grounded, which I believe it is. First, John, wait. Now I'm gonna take it, and I'm gonna hold it next to him, right? And then we do the same thing, and if he's much more grounded, then that should, you should be able to stay strong when I give you, that's a good noise, that's what we're looking for.
Yeah.
He can get quieter still, but I would say that that little black box that I was waving around seemed to have a great deal of impact. So let's try this again. So the last time we did this, you were weak. Right, so can So that would be one way of indicating that we've had some success in grounding. So it's not everything I would hope for, but it's. So what I'm gonna, so the last time he was ridden was when?
He's never been
ridden.
ridden. I've been on his back one time in 5 years.
So I'm gonna do something that is probably not a good idea.
You're gonna jump on.
I'm gonna put tack on, and then,
But he was very quiet when he let me
we're
see
gonna
it.
ride him a little bit,
Oh,
and,
gosh.
Well, he is broke.
No, he is broke.
He is a little bit of a tough case.
Yeah, he might need to really.
so maybe what we'll do is,
Yeah.
so I don't know if you can tell, but he just took a couple of deep breaths, which is very good. He might be has he worn the Theratree much? No.
No, I've had it on him once or twice, but I use it mostly on 2 or 3 other horses.
So part of the anxiety could be the
The
fact that
saddle's on his back,
he's got something on his back.
and he thinks he's gonna go do something. And he
So
doesn't know
this
what.
is another point that I'd like to make, and I think that this is important. When you think about both the life of racehorses and when you think about the life of the ridden horse, period, what difference would there be, do we think, if we brought the horse something that we put on his back that actually caused him to feel good, as opposed to something that he had to tolerate? That's a very interesting question, and I'm going to suggest that we don't really know what the answer to that is, because we've never really come to the horse with something to put on their back that makes them feel better than they felt without it, right? So if we were to be able to do that, how much different would their whole interaction with us be? And I think that's what we're driving to find an answer for. And I believe that the answer is that it's going to make quite a big difference. But, you know, it could well be that this horse's experience with Pat or anything on his back has been one where he anticipates it being at a minimum, uncomfortable, or B, quite painful.
Right.
So if we can switch that around, maybe that'll be a complete change. So I'm gonna take this. Someone call him?
Yeah, I'm calling you, this horse here is, he's weaving, and Holly has not put the dare tree on him yet, but he builds and does this every day, he's moving toward feeding time, she said, so. Anytime?
Anytime, yeah.
Well, why don't we let this guy hang here for a minute,